In the Cassandra Crossing, a deadly virus spreads on board a large passenger train. The film contains the expected spectacle, but it's the heavier themes that make it a different breed of disaster movie. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I don't have a quote for this one.
This is a movie podcast. We get together and we talk about a film. We usually work through franchises or themes and seasons of movies, and our current season is 70s disaster movies. This is our second episode in said season, and today we're looking at the Cassandra Crossing, which is from 1976, directed by George P. Cosmatos, who I recognized that name and went, oh, what's he done? I definitely know that from something.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Turns out I've seen 3 of his films alone this. I have seen Rambo First Blood Part 2. I have seen Cobra, so he did a couple of Stallone films. And then I've also seen, and actually quite enjoy, Leviathan, which is a underwater sci-fi horror movie that came out in 1989. So, yeah, interesting name to see. I was like, oh, damn, I definitely know him from something.
I mean, I think, I don't know this, but I think his son is probably Panos Cosmatos, who of course did Mandy and Beyond the Black Rainbow.
I am quite fond of Beyond the Black Rainbow, I must say. I must say. Also this guy did Tombstone, which actually is probably the most popular of all the things that he's done alone in this, but it's by far the one that I know even though I've seen it, but I've seen it once. You know, it's got a good cast, but
yeah, absolutely.
I didn't really remember all that well. So yes, the Cassandra Crossing will start spoiler free as we always do. We'll give you warning before we get into spoilers. It is a film about a virus or a disease, whatever you want to call it. It breaks out on a train.
Bacterial agent.
Technically, yes, it was something that was designed for bacterial warfare specifically. But someone gets infected with it, and they sneak onto a train, and that's the movie. That's the movie. There's characters on the train who have to then deal with it.
You say that's the movie as if this doesn't pivot like 4 times.
Oh, it goes places, and literally, because it's a train, it's going places.
Wow, yeah.
Come on. That was like sometimes there's a softball and you have to hit it. You have to swing and take your shot.
I'll give it to you. I won't be happy about it, but I'll give it to you.
Yeah. And as with a lot of these movies, we've got an ensemble cast. We've got some fairly big names. Probably not quite as stacked as maybe some of the other disaster films, but there is definitely some names in here. We have a young Martin Sheen in here. We got Richard Harris, who I mainly know as an older actor because he's in Gladiator, and I think he was in the first couple of Harry Potter movies.
Yeah, he was the original Dumbledore.
Yeah, so obviously he's much younger here compared to that. We have O.J. Simpson.
Because why not?
I often forget, because he's in Towering Inferno as well. I forget that he was already acting in the 70s because, you know, I just, you know, I think of not Top Gun, sorry, Naked Gun, whenever I think of him being in movies. We also have Ava Gardner, Sophia Loren, and, you know, a couple other faces you might recognize from things. Burt Lancaster's in there. So, yeah, you've got a big ensemble. All the passengers on the train, for the most part, 1 or 2 of them aren't, but that's by and large who these people are. And they all have different roles to play in the movie. It's, you know, I think last episode I described disaster movies as usually being a series of obstacles for characters to get over. This actually falls into a sort of second type, which is more that there is obviously something going on, but there's more of a countdown to a bigger disaster that is trying to be averted, and can they avert it kind of thing. So this falls a little bit more into that category of disaster film, but it absolutely has a lot of the tropes. It has the ensemble cast, it has the feeling of a disaster movie, and you know, we'll get into all the other things. Now, I hadn't seen this before. In fact, I'd barely even heard of it until I went researching 70s disaster movies. So yeah, so we'll get into it. We'll see how we felt, and we'll talk about it in depth. So, David, what did you think of the Cassandra Crossing?
So, again, I'm not well versed in 70s disaster. I'm barely versed in 70s period, but this is obviously, I wouldn't even say a step down from Poseidon Adventure. It is just ever so slightly, but it's more of just a lateral move. Like, it's such a completely different type of disaster movie where this isn't so much about problem solving as much as it is of just throw everything against the wall to try to get past the disaster. And in that regard, I guess I enjoy it, but it is, at times it gets so crazy with what it's doing that I feel that it kind of loses track of like, hey guys, there was a virus. Do we remember that part?
Uh-huh. I can see what you're saying. Yeah, obviously, like, the premise sounded solid going in.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it sounded like a fine idea for a movie. I have to say, I ended up being quite into it. And I think the crazier it got, the more into it I was. But,
Okay.
But I think the main thing I liked about it, though, is this kind of boils down to two main points. One is it felt like it was actually trying to be kind of poignant by the end, which I don't think I would say.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I would say almost no other disaster movie, even if they try, like, because Poseidon Adventure was a really fun movie, right? It had the really fun obstacles and all that, and it has a good character beat towards the end for one of the main characters. I won't spoil it, just in case you've skipped that episode and you don't want spoilers for it. But I wouldn't say it feels that poignant as a whole, whereas I would say that the last 10 minutes of this are very impressive in both tone and also I did not expect, and I'm going to stay clear of spoiling a thing here. I will just say that the set piece at the end went way further than I ever expected it to go, especially for this time period.
Absolutely. There are multiple points in this movie where they do special effects for not only things like the virus taking effect, but also them being on the train. They do certain special effects. And up until that last set piece, they all feel pretty cheap. Like, nothing feels very well done in terms of the special effects. But then that last one is just like, nope, here's where all the money went. Literally all of it.
Yeah, and it's not even that big a problem because by and large it's just like, there's a bit of, rear screen projection out the window here or something, It's just little things like that, and it's like, okay, for the most part it doesn't really matter because we're just, it's a story, it's almost like a bottle drama in disaster movie form because they're all just on these train cars. But then obviously you have this big thing at the end and it's like, holy shit, they went places with that, and I did not expect it at all. And I thought the dour kind of like poignant thing it was trying to say at the end kind of landed for me in a way that I don't think most disaster movies do, and so I respect that. I respect that a lot.
I think that this movie was definitely one whose ending saved it. I think that the setup to the movie in general was good. Introducing the characters, fine. But the middle part for me is what really dragged it out and made it like, okay, does this need to be 2 hours long? Probably not. But we're getting some character development and we're getting to know these people. So I accepted it. But then by the time it hit the end, I'm like, okay, now I see what we were going for this whole time.
I think I respect as well at the ending, like, because the problem they're kind of facing in the final act is not what the first problem was that they were all introduced to in the first act. It's a very new kind of side thing that's got a big moral element to it. And I kind of like that. I think because it pivoted and because it wasn't just a typical disaster movie that played out the same beats, I was kind of, like... And also, I just want to say, so the Cassandra Crossing specifically is a bridge in the film. And I just want to say, as weird as it might be, every time it cut to shots of this bridge, like, because obviously they get there by the end, but throughout the film it cuts to shots of this bridge with what I can only describe as horror movie music as it's selling the threat of getting to this bridge. And I loved every time it did this. I had a big grin in my face. It was like these piano stings were playing. There's all these, like, the first time you see it, it's like spooky mist like going through this creaky old bridge that looks, rusty, and I was like, there's some atmosphere here. What's going on? I'm liking this.
Every time they cut to it, it felt like they were doing it like Michael Myers.
Yeah,
because they had a character specifically be like, "We're going to have to go over the Cassandra Crossing," and then all of a sudden, ominous music, the strings kick in. It's like, guys, it's a bridge. But they sold it as like this horrifying thing. But even then, like, if you took it on its own without the characters' reactions to it, nothing they're showing is that horrifying. They're just basically showing like rust. So
it's all in the direction. It's the fog machine. It's the silhouette shots with the sun behind it. It's all these things, and it feels like it's a demonic entity or something.
I will say, trivia wise, that I found is that apparently this bridge was made and designed by the guy who did the Eiffel Tower. So,
well, 1 out of 2 is not bad.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, it is it's so, I mean, it is technically spoilers, so I won't get too much into it, but it is strange how hard the pivot changes the feel of the movie. Because for the first part, it's kind of this existential dread of like, okay, how long do we have? They explicitly say at one point that they're going to be held in quarantine for 21 days and see how it all goes. But then as soon as the pivot happens, it immediately switches to, we know exactly how long we have, and it's a race against time. So it's a complete tone change halfway through, but it works. It works for this specific movie.
I think it does, because I think it just as it's starting to feel like it's getting slow, because maybe it is a little too long in that first half or whatever. When that tone change comes, it kind of feels like, oh, you've just perked me up. I'm interested again, because you've kind of drawn me into this new idea. So also, I guess one of the things we should mention here is that, you know, this plot hits a little differently, I think, in post 2020 world.
Yeah. Like, I'm sitting there, they're talking like, oh, you have no right to keep us on this train. I was like, I feel like I've heard this before. Am I
Yeah, I don't think when this movie came out and there's like armed guards at one point not letting people off the train, I have to assume at the time there was probably just an instant feeling of, this is outrageous, why would they bring guns? And all I can think about from 2020 is like, you know what, I kind of sympathize with them, like, you know, enforcing this.
Yeah. No, I 100% guarantee you, like, the movies that when the pandemic hit were big were the ones that were like, you know, the plague, like the ones that are like, oh no, they're wiping out humanity. But I guarantee you, if this one got any public spotlight, it would be like the people who were protesting the quarantine and all that, it would be their rallying cry. They're like, see, they're incompetent. Look at them do this thing. That is one thing in this movie was very strange to me, was the demonization of the International Health Organization. For some reason, they're played as just these horrible people in the public's eyes.
I know, in the public's eyes, sure. I think one thing that's to be clear, though, is that they're not actually the incompetent ones. It's actually the American military who are the incompetent ones.
We're number one.
Because the entire premise, the setup of the film, is that terrorists are trying to blow up the health organization for some reason, because of all the nasty things.
They're a quote-unquote Swedish peace movement.
Why a peace movement is blowing up a building, I don't know. But
I don't know.
Basically, when they end up in a fight with the guards at the headquarters, they burst into a lab, and one of the guards like shoots this, like, you know, beaker of something, right? And it goes all over. And I swear, I joked last week this is going to be Chernobyl on a train, I think, or I said that somewhere recently, and sure enough, like, I was getting some Chernobyl kind of flashbacks. And when I say Chernobyl, I mean the miniseries about the disaster, not the disaster itself. In that we're showing this guy who's ran away, and we know that he's been infected by this thing because he literally got the liquid on him. It's not even just that he was close to it. And, you know, it's like paying attention to like everyone he's like walking past, everything he touches, everything he's near that he might have, like, you know, left some sweat on or whatever. Like, it's really paying attention to that. And I was like, oh, this is good shit. This is like, like, I'm paying attention to this because you're focusing on it. And you're making it clear, all the places he's been in the train and who might be infected and so on and so on.
Yeah, I was writing down in my notes specifically every time he passed by somebody to start with, because I was like, oh, maybe there's going to be a thing later on where like they have to trace it out and get that to the point of like, okay, who has been infected, who hasn't. But then he's literally just like marching down the halls, hugging children, like, and I'm like, okay, no, everyone's infected. We're just going to go with that. And at one point it reaches him coughing into a bowl of steamed rice that was going to be served to passengers later, and I'm like, okay, we're just going to assume everybody, and we'll backtrack from there. if need be.
Yeah. So all that stuff I think is quite effective. I kind of like some of the overly cinematic direction of the bridge, like I said.
Oh,
Uh, and the cast by and large are pretty good. Some of the characters are a little bit eccentric, and we'll talk about that when we get to spoilers. But certainly memorable in different ways. What's actually really funny is that Martin Sheen this same year was in a movie called The Little Girl Down the Lane, or it's a title like that. If I maybe slightly getting it wrong, but it's him and Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster being, of course, Taxi Driver age at the time, 1976, and he's like this pervert pedophile in that movie who's trying to like get it on with like this 13-year-old. So it was just kind of like a surreal moment that he's in this as well, and he's not a kid obviously, but he's actually the young boy toy of some like rich wife who's like taking him around Europe because
that's the one critique I'll give this movie, is that the individual characters' plots are so disconnected. Like, yes, they all are working in this bigger thing, but there is no even attempt to like kind of tie it together between any different plot. You have the doctor and the writer plot. You have this young boy toy and the cougar plot. You have O.J. Simpson's plot, which kind of ties into that last one. And then you have the guy who just like sells watches on the train.
He's quite important thematically as the movie goes on.
He is thematic, but they don't really... Everyone is separate. Everyone's doing their own things. And that's what I feel like makes the first half drag, is that we're developing each of their plots individually. We're cutting between each of them, but they never really tie together that well.
Yeah, it obviously takes a bit of time, and it feels like it's taking a bit of time because it's cutting between all these ongoing plots that are kind of separate. But once it does take those turns about halfway through, so it's choo choo, all steam ahead, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Without getting too much in spoilers, there's not much more I can say. Special effects are really the only thing, and again, like you said, they don't use them that much, but when they are used, it feels like the cheapest part of the movie, because like you said, they go big on everything else. And unlike Poseidon Adventure, they show you they had access to this train. This is not a set. They were on this train and they were working with it constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there was sets as well to shoot a lot of the scenes, but they had a train and they had a helicopter. Actually, one thing on this is just a random observation of mine, but helicopters, the history of the helicopter is a weird thing to me, just in that I feel like helicopters have looked the same for a long time, but there's a cut-off somewhere after this movie, right? Because this is the pre-cut-off helicopter, where before a certain time, and I'm going to say 70s and back, to whatever helicopters existed up into the 70s, they have this kind of like bubble glass at the front, and then like the sort of the wireframe like structure, and they look this really old school kind of thing, right? And I've seen it in other movies from this period. I think the old Batman show had a Batcopter or something like that. But then of course there's what you think of as a modern helicopter, and I feel like modern helicopters have looked like modern helicopters since probably the end of the 70s, start of the 80s. I don't know why, but for some reason there's this cut off where they just look ancient before that date, and then after that date they've all looked the same since.
I'd imagine, and I have no basis for this.
You're not a helicopter,
I'm just throwing it out there.
Expert or aficionado.
I got a cousin I'm sure I could call in, but no, I'm just going to put out there that the 70s were kind of the time, at least in America, where God knows we spend more on our military than anybody else. 70s were kind of the time where there was that push for, hey, maybe things should be safer. Maybe we should have regulations. So I'm just going to put out that maybe that's why that happened around that time, where they were like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have a literal ball of tinfoil attached to spinning blades and call it a day.
That is a fair guess. That is honestly as good a guess as I could have mustered, to be honest. Yeah. So, fair play. I mean, if I'm going to make other nitpicks, this is supposed to be a train in Switzerland that's going to France, and like other than some intentional background dialogue that you're not supposed to care about or understand, there's very little of anyone speaking anything other than English.
Yeah. It was even moments where like they were at the train station in Switzerland, and two people who were very obviously of some European descent were just speaking in English to each other. And it's like, I understand that from a accessibility standpoint of your audience, you don't want to have to constantly keep switching over to like subtitles or even just the audience not knowing what they're saying. But it does lose a little bit to it being like, just that standard, why is everyone speaking American? Oh, that's why, because it's American. Although, to be fair, this one I think was done entirely in Italy and the UK. So...
I'm not surprised. I mean, you'd be surprised how many American movies are shot in... Because it's Pinewood and Shepperton studios in England that, you know, Alien and Aliens were both shot in England. You know, it's like...
Yeah,
you know, so that's not uncommon, for sure.
Yeah.
It is... Because we're getting to this earlier on, but, you know, part of the reason why so you've got this American military character, this colonel who comes in to call the shots, and he's not actually a part of the health organization. He is there because, this thing that we had in this jar was secret, and we don't want anyone to know. I mean, we obviously don't want it to break out and like cause a pandemic, but we'd also don't want anyone to know that we were doing it. So a lot of the decisions sort of come from that aspect. So there is a lot of a critique of like the untrustworthy, you know, the man, if you will.
Oh, absolutely. They explicitly say that later on in the film. They have him be like, I know it's not fashionable being a military man anymore. And it's like, oh, okay, so this is the man period. Got it.
Yeah. Did we ever really leave that period?
Nah, it just changed as to who the man was. Nowadays, it's corporate policies.
True, yes.
I will say one thing with the International Health Organization was, you know, you walked in the front door, nobody there. You made your way down the hallway, because these guys faked their way of them having, like, a patient.
Yeah, they've got a stretcher, and, like, their third guy's in the stretcher pretending to be sick.
Yeah, which doesn't... Like, that's like me going into a children's hospital or something like that with like a broken leg and be like, you're kind of in the wrong spot, but I guess we can help you. But anyway, they make their way down to this hallway. They shoot a guard who's blocking this area for discernibly no reason except that this is where all the secret stuff is.
To be fair, there's a sign on the door that says, you know, top secret danger, you know, no one go in or whatever.
But this is the part that threw me that I feel like it's not a thing, is that down the hallway, everyone's organized by country. It's like, here's Canada's room.
Yeah, there's literally a door that says Canada on it.
Yeah. And it's like down at the hall, the one that says, this is the worst, is America. And wouldn't you know it, they're the ones who, and you say that they don't want anybody to know about the bacteria. It's because they explicitly say that they're breaking numerous international laws by storing this bacteria in Switzerland.
There's a bit of the terminal kind of like element to the plot where this is not really brought up that much, but there is a mention of like none of the countries the train's going through is okay with them taking the passengers off the train there, because they don't want this to break out in their country.
Exactly.
So this train has become international, or possibly even just, this is US land. This train is US soil.
Yeah.
And like, you're not coming off of it without, you know, clearance and passports and shit.
It does make me wonder is that they clearly had to talk to these companies saying, hey, can we stop this train in your country or pass through your country? And they say, why? And they say, because there's a deadly virus. And they say, no. So by the end of the movie, you get this whole thing, and this isn't really spoilers, but you get the whole thing, like you said, of him wanting to hide that this virus is a thing. Clearly they know. The countries explicitly know and say, you can't stop it here.
I mean, that, to be fair, we only hear that from him, so maybe he was lying when he said that.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Because he is constantly lying to this like doctor lady that he brings in for advice. He's constantly withholding truth and saying, we'll take this call in private, corporal, and things like that. So
I do love the character of the doctor because she is trying to insert herself into as much of this as possible. And like it comes down to one point, the guy brings in some files, be like, oh, here's the examination of the bridge, sir. And she just like walks over and looks at it, and he's like, no. You go back to your medicine, lady.
Yeah. Because I was getting ready to critique it at the start, and this is exactly what it turned out to be: is that she just didn't know something, because they've got like one of the terrorists like in a hospital bed, just sort of dying, and the colonel comes in, and he's asking questions. They're trying to talk to him, but he can't speak; he's too sick, and she is basically saying, "Well, thankfully we've got him here, and there's no breakout to be worried about." And I'm like, right. Wait, there was guards shooting at them. Like, they knew there was another guy who got away. Why? And then, but then it turns out the colonel does know this, and it's just her that's not been told this because it's top secret. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. She just didn't know. Yeah. But like, because he like a minute later, like, no, there was another man, and he's out there somewhere. So,
I will say I liked they did a little investigatory thing at the very beginning of how they managed to track him down to be on this train.
Mm-hmm.
And like they had to wait until the other terrorist died. They searched through his stuff and they found the train ticket. And the only part of that threw me was that the dude just snuck onto the train. Like he purposely just hitched a ride. He didn't use his ticket. He just jumped on the train. So I don't understand why the ticket part was necessary, you know? It seemed like he could have theoretically jumped onto any train.
I think it was less about, because I don't know if the ticket was for that specific train necessarily. Maybe it was. I think it was more the idea of, okay, this is what his destination was going to be. So, like, okay, let's look at the trains that are going in that direction. Let's look at the planes that are going in that direction. Oh, we've checked all the airports. No one's...
That's fair.
Because they say that at one point, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's like he's probably on that train. This is like the most likely place for it. And sure enough, as it goes on, they become more clear.
Yeah. But I did like that investigation stuff where it showed you the clear line of like, all right, how do we narrow down from just a dude in a turtleneck to specifically that train? And they showed the process at the very least. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we'll give the spoiler warning so we can start talking about the movie properly in depth, and it's. Yep. Yeah, it goes places, like I said. It really does.
Spoiler warning in 3, 2, 1. It's not a virus disaster movie.
Well, it is until it's not.
Yeah.
It's many things though. It is many things. Mm-hmm. We're introduced to all of our characters. Of course, we see them arriving at the train station and get their various introductions. You got O.J. Simpson, who seems to be a priest, although very quickly it teases that he's not quite who he says he is. And there is a line. It's like when the colonel gets a list of the passengers, like he's like going, "Oh God, there's this famous doctor guy on board, and in fact, there's even someone on board that's been wanted by Interpol for smuggling heroin." And I actually thought O.J. Simpson was the smuggler because he was acting all cagey. Yeah. We see his tattoo that he's hiding from the kid and all that. Obviously, the reveal later on is that he's actually from Interpol hunting down the heroin smuggler. He's investigating. So you've got that element of it. We see Martin Sheen he's got like an ascot on, and he's with this rich lady who is married to a German arms manufacturer.
Yeah, I tried looking this guy up and I can't find it. His name is Hugo and her last name is Dressler, but Hugo Dressler does not come up, so I don't know.
I assume it's just fictional. I never took it as a real person.
See, yes, I agree. But at the same point, like, as they're using guns later on in this film, she explicitly points out, like, the model, and says, my husband makes these. He'd be happy to know you're using them. So I feel like that's too specific of a reference to not have. But I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I spent far too long trying to find this guy.
I didn't give it a second thought, but I'm glad you're here to answer the irrelevant questions.
I know things that no one needs to know.
I was going to say answering the tough questions, but it's just an irrelevant question.
Did you know that, I'm blanking on his name right now, Richard Harris was married to the girl who's like the singer in that weird band thing?
Oh, did he get his girlfriend or wife apart there, did he?
No, she earned it of her own right. If you want to actually know about that, the one of the producers of the movie, I forget who at the moment, but is the husband of Sophia Loren, and basically just got her the lead part because he thought it would be a good showcase for her.
I mean, she's good in the role. I can't really complain that much. Just trying to remember what. Do I know her from in particular? I don't know if I do.
She's been in a decent amount.
Yeah, she's been in a lot of stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was wondering if there was something specific, but I don't know if there is. So yeah, you're interested in Martin Sheen and his like sugar mama, basically. And it turns out later that he is the heroin smuggler, and he's basically getting through like security really easily because he's with her, and she's been treated like royalty by everyone. So that's all fine. Richard Harris plays a doctor, Dr. Chamberlain, who is a semi-famous doctor. And I say semi-famous because like regular people don't really recognize him, but he's on a magazine cover, and like other doctors know who he is, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the one point was the if we're just going to keep calling her the sugar mama at one point says, "I've heard your name, but I genuinely don't know what you're famous for." Like, it's that kind of level of famous where he's talked about, but everyone's like, "Oh yeah, that guy. He's sure, whatever."
That sums him up. And then we have his two-time ex-wife, which is Sophia Loren's character, the writer Jennifer, who intentionally comes out of the train because she knows he's going to be there to potentially rekindle their marriage, even though it seems they've got kind of this like almost comical like Sam and Diane thing where they kind of are bickering back and forth in a sort of playful way, and clearly have chemistry and all the rest of it. So you've got all them. You've got an older man, Kaplan, who sells watches and does the occasional little magic trick.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure out exactly what his character was, but in the end, I think it's revealed that he is a Holocaust survivor.
I don't even know if they ever outright say it. It's just very heavily indicated that that's what he is.
Yeah, and basically, it sounds like he's homeless, and he just rides this train back and forth, like trying to sell watches and stuff to people.
Yeah, because he knows like the conductor, he knows like the guy who sells the tickets and all that. Like he knows everyone who works there and gets on with them. So that just seems to be his thing. And he tries to because O.J. Simpson gets like a free upgrade to first class because he's a priest. And Kaplan comes in and he's like, "Oh, if it's a free upgrade, I'll take one as well." And the guy's like, "Nah, sorry."
Which I don't get, because you say it's because he's a priest. That wasn't the literal reason he gave the upgrade. He's like, there's not a lot of people in first class this trip. Here you go. And he's like, "Can I have one?" "No." "Screw you." Like, it didn't feel like there was any reason not to give this guy first class.
Not to give him, sure, but like it definitely started off as, not first class for you, Father. Oh no, the church would never pay for that. Well, here it is on me. There's not a lot of people there, so you can have it on the house, kind of thing. You should have given it to Kaplan as well. Like, I don't know why.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One other, it's barely even in the movie, but one group that I really want to bring attention to is the traveling band who has gotten a ride on this train, only because that was also in Poseidon Adventure. Like, was this just a thing in the 70s that there was just always a traveling band?
Yeah, I guess.
All right, whatever. Sure.
I'll that's my guess. I thought the younger couple came from this band, but I don't actually think they did. Like,
did they not? I thought they did.
Maybe they did. But you never see them with the band again, so I wasn't sure as the movie went on if that's where they came from. But yeah, there's like a younger couple. One of whom you said was the wife of Richard Harris.
Yes.
But we basically they're just having sex, and then they get involved in the plot at various points. But they're relatively minor characters compared to everyone else we've mentioned. Obviously, the Colonel, who's back at the high-tech headquarters in the 1970s, looking at these maps and like modern high-tech TV screen. I'm making fun of it because obviously it's the 70s and we're
It is, but it's like I can see this is because didn't Star Wars come out around this time?
About a year after this.
Year after. So you can see like the writing on the wall, because it's almost the same sort of style as like the what is it, the rebel ship at the very beginning of the first Star Wars, where it's like all white, very pasty. There's sliding doors everywhere for no reason, and all like the buttons and displays and whatnot are as advanced as they possibly could be in the 70s. But it is so hilarious to just see that, and it's played up for this, like, I'm sure at the time, oh, look how high tech all of their stuff is. They've got this map that like does this, and I'm like, I literally have seen better things on a Nokia. Like, this is not that great in retrospect.
The train lines light up, and you can see where the train is on the train line. It's high tech.
Which, that, strangely enough, that's the one part that made no sense to me at all. Like, did they just go through and like wire up all the train tracks to show where trains are at any given point? Because I don't feel like they should have this tech, honestly. That somehow feels too high tech for what they would have at the time.
It's the sort of thing where now it's just, it's basically just GPS or whatever, and you just sort of accept it. But then you think about it and go, wait a minute, the 1970s didn't have any of the infrastructure for that. So
exactly.
What's going on here? I think the honest answer is that the movie just wanted the characters on that side of the story being able to tell where the train is for drama's sake. That's the simple response.
Yeah. Rather than them having to stay on the phone with like a train conductor who's in like the rail switching station, just be like, oh, they just passed by.
Yeah.
All right, that's where they are.
Other helicopters just like constantly talking to them. Oh, they're just going through this part of whatever now.
I do like how they managed to structure the train ride to make it explain, like, here's why we cannot help them. And they explicitly say, like, look, we're trying to get the body off. We're getting it off by helicopter. But they are approaching this tunnel that leads into the mountains. And they explicitly say that once they get into the mountains, it is impossible for a helicopter to get to them. There is no way for them to fly out there. So they are essentially forced to be on their own. And I think that was a creative way of doing that, at least.
Yeah, I also think, as much as we're saying the first half maybe gets a little slow, a touch towards the back end of it, I do think there is kind of a neat build-up to the midway point where we kind of learn of this plan where they're going to like stop and get like basically medical help and like whatever the military and the scientists are going to do in Stockholm, and then it's on the way to the Cassandra Crossing. They kind of built up like there is going to be this turning point in the story at Stockholm, and that's where a lot of the passengers are finally going to find out they're in trouble, because up until this point, most of the passengers don't know anything's going on, and one of them does notice. I think is it the young wife?
It's Jenny.
Is it Jenny who notices that they actually pass by the train station that we're supposed to stop at, and doesn't, and it's like, wait, why did we just not stop? Like, some people were supposed to get off there.
I was gonna say, I feel like somebody should have noticed that. They're like, oh, hey, look, honey, we're coming up to the... Oh, okay. Sir?
But, it builds up to this sort of midway point, and it does feel like a sort of like mid-finale, if you will, to compare it to like a TV show. It feels like a mid-season finale when they get to Stockholm, and that's where the tone really starts to take a shift. It starts to feel quite dire. It feels like, oh shit, there's guys in hazmat suits with guns like outside the train, and they're putting these big like shutters on all the windows so that no one can escape through the windows. And the colonel gives the order, like, if anyone tries to run, like, shoot them. They can't let them out of the population.
And, I mean, they did explicitly at one point have the colonel hop over the intercom and basically tell them, like, hey, some of you have noticed we've been skipping stations. That's because there was a bomb threat. We're going to reroute you. You're fine. Everything's cool. And that's where people start freaking out, because they're like, we need to get to our places. And it's only once they arrive at this, I think you said Stockholm, that they're given the full truth of like, okay, you guys are going to be trapped here. We're putting you in quarantine. We're driving you out to Poland. And good luck.
You're going to be quarantining for 3 weeks at the very least. And you're going to have to deal with that. Yeah, because obviously people, they're furious. Like, because this isn't just like they're going to a slightly different town. Some of these people thought they were going to Paris on this train, or are being diverted to Poland. That's a pretty big diversion.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I honestly think the weirdest part is that we only see like 2-3 people really freak out. Like, yeah, everyone's pissed off once the guys and guns come on. They kind of like back off. But there's one woman who just screams for no reason, as far as I could tell. Like she sees some guards walking down the aisles, and then she just freaks out, starts pounding on the glass. And then Kaplan, he makes his way and actually tries to sneak off the train and is shot, but he gets better.
Well, I actually thought they were going to kill him here, and I thought it was going to be this dark moment. And this is where you first start to get a hint of maybe what the movie's actually going to try and do, because he just sort of really ominously says, "I can't go back there," when they mention Poland, and they mention kind of like the part of Poland they're going to, and that's where you first sort of get the idea that, oh, like, is he a Holocaust survivor? Because this kind of sounds like what he's talking about, and he's about the right age, for the 70s and all that. And I was actually expecting a reveal, because at one point I think the doctor's like checking his arm, and I was expecting a reveal of a number.
Yeah,
and they never did it. They never went down that path to actually spell it out to us, which I can appreciate. Like, I don't think it need to be. Like, I got it certainly, especially as the movie went on, and it wasn't just like, oh, he doesn't like Poland. It wasn't that. Like, this man is mortified of the idea of going back to this place.
See, the only part that was weird to me was that his trigger for it, the thing he was freaked out about, wasn't the end destination. The part that freaked him out was specifically the Cassandra Crossing. It was the bridge. And maybe it's like a one-way street or something like that, where as soon as you hit the bridge, like where the end result's going to be. But it seemed weird to me that if he was in some sort of concentration camp or something, or if he was in some sort of camp in Poland, that the name of the camp wouldn't be the thing he was repeating, I felt like it was strictly designed just so it's like, no, guys, the biggest threat is the bridge. You want to freak out about the bridge. Yeah, the camp's wet. The bridge, though.
Yeah, he does, because there's a line where they say, oh yeah, they're going to put us in a isolation camp,
a health camp
at Cassandra Crossing, and he says, is that what they're calling it these days? And I think it's very notable though that he's a very upbeat, kind of like laughable old man up until this point in the movie. Like, he was very cheery. He tries to make friends with people. He jokes around with the doctor at one point, sort of like basically steals his watch, like, without him realizing,
right off his hand.
And presents it back to him, and sort of, it's all a jokey little moment. He's friends with the conductor. He's joking around with everyone. He seems to get on with everyone. And then there's this turn where all of a sudden he is mortified about where they might be going. And I thought he was, just going to run and get shot and die. Obviously, he gets shot in the arm, and he kind of just sort of, from that point on, he's basically just sitting there, kind of like, just out of it. Like, for most of the movie, he's just kind of sitting there until he decides to kind of like do something towards the end, and it's a big moment for him towards the end that kind of finally pays off this feeling that he's got. But this even just introducing this idea of a Holocaust survivor not wanting to go to this location for that reason, immediately my brain started just sort of thinking, and I was like, okay, is the movie like trying to actually make a point here and say something? Is it going to actually do something with this? And I think by the end it did. Like, as it started to introduce other things into it, particularly when it became, because ultimately as the movie goes on, like the dog that gets infected early on, like the guy who sneaks on the train ends up like hiding next to the dog, and the dog gets infected, and they realize this and they send the dog away with a helicopter, and the dog gets better. And then, not too long after that, passengers on the train start to get better. And it turns out that just all the extra oxygen that they're pumping into the train is what's helping them, right? And okay, fine, whatever. If that's what cures this, that's fine. We'll accept it. It's a movie.
I'm willing to accept that, save for they wrote themselves into a corner that they felt the need to explain themselves out of, which was the first guy that they had in the hospital and they were talking to. They were like, well, we gave him oxygen and he still died. And they were like, oh, it's because it was absorbed into his blood. That's totally different. And I'm like, no, it's not. You didn't even need to have that. Like, I would have forgotten it if you didn't even bother to mention it. But they felt the need to explain this half-assed explanation of like, yeah, no, it got into an open wound. Anyway, let's talk about the train some more, right?
I mean, they could have just said he was also shot multiple times.
Yeah, I feel like that would have killed him.
Like,
that would have done it.
Like, his body was too weak to fight at the end. Anyway, so it becomes this thing where it's like, at this point in the movie, I'm thinking, wait, they're starting to get better. And there's a couple of deaths, and like there's maybe like an old person who dies from it because they're just told to fight it, and they sort of have a heart attack or something. They mentioned that.
Well, they all get sick before the oxygen starts getting pumped in, so they die before that.
That's also true, yeah. But not everyone gets sick though. Like, no. Because they even say early on, it's like 60% of people will get it. Not everyone.
They say 60%, and like they said that this train holds 1,000 people, so 600 people should be sick. I feel like we saw like 10.
To be fair,
I don't feel like.
To be fair, I think that's in terms of a scale though. I feel like I was never convinced there was 1,000 people on this train.
True.
Because I looked at the train and went, I would guess maybe 300 people are on this train.
I wasn't convinced that there were that many people on the train until the final piece of this movie, where all of a sudden it's like, who are these people?
We'll get to anyway. I'll try to explain the damn thing.
Sorry.
Right. So at this point in the movie, it becomes like, wait, the people are getting healthier. There's actually no risk. But by this point, the communications have been shut up. We'll talk about why later. But the communications have been shut up, and they're going towards Cassandra Crossing, and it becomes about like convincing, if not those in charge, then at least the people on the train that are operating for the people in charge, that there is no threat, and that the rickety old bridge that might collapse if the train goes over it is actually the real threat. And it's about trying to kind of like, is the determination to hide what's going on going to end up killing the people rather than the actual virus itself? And is it the man? Is it the military? Those elements that are going to actually do the harm. And the line that stuck out to me specifically that made me sort of tie it back into the idea of this Holocaust survivor on the train is so the colonel is the doctor lady with him giving him advice. Is constantly questioning things and constantly saying, hey, the dog's getting better, like they're probably getting better, we should probably contact them. And he's like, it's too late, like they have to go this way, blah blah blah. And it becomes, she slowly realizes as she's trying to convince him and getting no response, and he's giving her these cold looks, she's realizing what this all means and kind of confronts him with the truth of what he's doing, and he's effectively sending these people to die. And he says, oh, you think I'm a murderer? And she's, no, I don't think you're a murderer. I think you're just willing to let it happen, and I don't know if that's worse. Right. And this idea of like turning an eye and letting this happen, and the idea that the people on the train are going to have to actually fight to live when the people up top are making decisions that are just abandoning them. I thought thematically there were some things in there that were kind of lining up a little bit.
Oh yeah, the whole movie, once you get into the second half, is basically the bad guys are blindly obeying orders and the good guys are taking up and fighting against the system. That's the central theme of at least the second half of the movie, where it is think for yourself, do your own thing, don't just blindly accept what's put in front of you. And because of that, it comes off very strongly, as we said, anti-man, anti-military, where it is, these people who otherwise are just average people. You got a doctor, you got the one guy who's the boyfriend of the young girl. Like, he had nothing else to do in this movie, yet he was still picking up a gun and taking shots against the other guards. So everyone here is just sort of fighting against the man once it's obvious that the man is basically trying to kill them. So yeah, it is very much... that line does centralize the theme of a little bit of Holocaust-like parallels, but more so, I think, just the don't blindly follow orders.
Yeah. Which I think also ties into that as well, because, that's very much something that many would say, I was just following orders, and it's, so there's the, like, it's a very ballsy thing for a disaster movie to effectively try and like bring illusions of that up and try and do something with it. And I'm not saying it's like the most in-depth thing ever. I'm not saying it's like this, like artsy film, but it did strike a few chords towards the end. I do think that it does feel quite nihilistic as like the race against time is running out, and like even people who didn't really like each other before are starting to team up and work together to fight the man. And you've got like the Interpol officer working with this heroin smuggler who is willing to help and try and like fight back and all these things, and Martin Sheen ultimately ends up getting killed trying to help everyone else by climbing alongside the train.
That's what I feel like is most nihilistic about it, is the fact that they've put forward plan after plan after plan, and it all just keeps failing. Like everything they've tried to do, and it's like not even failing in ways that are predictable. It's failing in ways that are just like, no, God personally hates you. Like the one point of they had an idea to blow up one of the carriages in order to separate it from the rest of the train, and they have to light a fuse. So they have to first make a fuse, and then they need to light it. And they've confiscated all lighters prior to this point. So Jenny goes around and finds a single match to light this thing, and immediately movie-wise you're thinking like, oh, that one match, it's gonna like take a while to light, but then it's gonna make its way down and it's gonna go off. But like, no, it just extinguishes. Like they light the fuse and it doesn't make it, and it's like, oh, all right, well,
no, not only does it not make it, it doesn't even, it makes it like maybe 5 inches before it gives up, and then that's it. It's like, oh shit, okay,
exactly. It's just like, no, God personally hates you and does not want this to succeed. And they have to actively fight against the odds there. And
it's Kaplan who kind of goes in and sacrifices himself. He just walks in very stoically and makes this sacrifice to make this explosion happen, which allows them to separate the train. And if I have a critique, if anything, and I don't have a lot to critique about the ending because I actually really like most of it and think it's hard hitting in a number of ways. The only thing I'll really critique is that I never felt it was very clear like how far forward or back on the train they were, where they were making this separation. Honestly, it seems like halfway, to be honest, given like how many cars we see go down at the end. But like, it does feel like everything's kind of like ticking up to this conclusion. And there's a couple of really quick, succinct deaths, or at least like serious wounds, where we see like, I think it's the boyfriend character, and then immediately one of the other characters gets shot, because it's like they're having these gunfights like in, you know, these, not just like the train cars, but like, you know, like when you the cars that have the cabins, so you've just got that narrow pathway at the side,
right?
And they're just like using the cabins for cover, and they're taking shots at each other. And at one point, like the hazmat suit guys, who are the bad guys in context here, are jumping into the carriages that have nothing but children in them, and like popping out and taking shots, and then hiding with the kids, and then popping out and taking shots. And it's like, they're showing this complete disrespect to follow orders, to do whatever's asked of them. And these other people who have figured out that they're going towards certain death, and that the Colonel's plan is probably like, it's probably convenient for us if they all just die in an accident.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, that's kind of his thing.
I mean, even when you get to the, not to spoil too much, but at the very end of the movie, he assumes everyone died. And he calls up one of his superiors and says, like, hey, there's been an accident. There were no survivors. And there's a beat. And then he says, yes. Well, thank you, sir. And it sounds like he just got a promotion. It sounds like he was just given like commendations for getting this to happen. I
loved that. That was actually one of my favorite moments of the whole film, is because it's cutting back and forth of the half of the train that has survived because they were able to like disconnect it. So the back half of the train, notably, as they mentioned during the film, is mostly the second class passengers. So it's interesting that it's the rich passengers that ended up mostly getting taken out.
Fight the man.
But it's cutting between them being happy that they've survived for, you know, what little like success they've had now, and it's cutting to like the Colonel saying, yes, thank you, sir, very, you know, very quietly and just very calmly being thanked for it. And the end of the film is that, you know, you hear that, oh yes, don't worry, like the Colonel and Dr. Lady are both under surveillance in case they try to talk to anyone. This idea being that he's just another cog in the machine, and even though he was the big bad villain in this movie to us, he's just potentially the victim of someone higher up the food chain later on.
Absolutely.
If he steps out of line, or if he doesn't conform, or whatever. It's got a point. It's got a message at the end.
Yeah, I do think the Colonel was probably one of the better written characters here, because it did manage to convince me that he doesn't particularly want this to happen. He doesn't want like 1,000 innocent people to die on his watch, but he has already done the debate in his head, and his duty to his country, his patriotism won out over disobeying orders, basically. And when it comes to the end of the movie of him making that call, yes, he's getting commendations for it, but he doesn't seem particularly happy. Like, he's not happy that it happened. Because the one other soldier, like, offers him out for drinks, and he's like, hey, yeah, there's this nice little coffee place around the corner. And he just stoically walks down the hallway and leaves without a word.
Yeah, it's
like,
insane.
He's aware that what he made morally, ethically, was probably not the right decision, but he still made that decision because it was his duty to do so.
There's a few interesting choices at this end, and we're talking about the final scenes here. Obviously, we're going to talk about the actual, well, the literal train wreck. But I think the idea that we don't even know what his superior officer is, and this video is like, it's just him talking to a phone. We don't hear the other voice. We don't hear him say any kind of indication of rank, or if it's like the president, or if it's whoever, like whoever this could be. It's just a faceless, voiceless entity, because that's all it is. And I think that's a really wise choice. Him not responding to the other soldier when he's asked to go out for a drink, I think it's a wise choice. The idea, and this is curious because I think part of me really wanted him to find out, no, half of the train at least survived.
I was waiting for it. I just wanted that. I wanted when the phone started ringing in the office and the other soldier picked up, I thought that was going to be the call saying like, Ariel has reported that there are all these extra people, and it's going to, you just imagine the fallout that comes out from that. But instead it left it kind of up. Strangely enough, another disaster movie of The Core. If you remember how that one ended.
Vaguely.
Where basically they put this, the whole fact that the Earth's core stopped spinning, they just buried it and nobody knew, and therefore all the people who died were left completely nameless because they didn't get to be recognized as heroes. But then they leaked it. They leaked it out, and the end credits are basically showing all these news organizations picking up the story and saying, oh, this thing happened. I really was waiting for that kind of moment where it was like, maybe not over the credits or anything like that, but just the idea that they know that there are survivors, and we get to see that this fallout, this domino chain has begun.
And you know what has to happen. They're not going to all these people surviving means that the story is going to get out and it's going to be talked about. But I think it's a very interesting choice to not see this, because it's like you were saying just a minute ago, is that, well, he's kind of the villain of the movie ultimately because he's the one enforcing this. He doesn't necessarily like that he's doing it, and I think in a weird way it's almost too much of a happy ending for him to find out that they got to survive, right? Or at least enough of them got to survive.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, so
that.
Leaving him in this moment where he thinks he successfully helped kill 1,000 people for his country kind of keeps the downbeat ending alive in a weird way.
See, yes, I agree, but it was only because they explicitly put in the line that he can absolutely confirm that everyone died. Like, he put his career on the line in that moment of saying, I confirm that they all died. That was the only thing I think would have kept it as a dour ending, even on his side, because after everything he did, after all of the horrible decisions he made in the name of his country's probably going to still stab him in the back and say, no, you confirmed that they were dead. Like,
yeah. I'm just thinking from the perspective of, like, maybe even if he is in trouble because he failed to do his job, he's deep down actually happy. You know, maybe he'll realize, you know, I'm actually happier that, like, somehow they fought against what I was doing and were able to get out. So I think in this weird way, him walking off thinking he's done this and that's a job well done, but he feels, you know, not great about it, works for the ending. So there's a lot of interesting little choices like that at the end of the film, as to like you know, keeping the superior officer, whoever it may be, a mystery, and just all these other little things. Yeah, the actual train wreck, so obviously there's all this big stuff with Martin Sheen, like, climbing outside the train and, like, going along, and then just being shot down by one of the guards when they notice him inside. Yeah. And just falling to his death.
It's very unceremonial. It's very much just like, again, like the fuse just blowing out. It's just that, no, you can't succeed here. This is not going to work. And it feels so just almost mean-spirited in the way that it's done, where it's feels like these guys aren't given a fair shot, as would be in, like, another action movie where, you know, in any other movie, Martin Sheen would have made it to, like, the second to last car. Like, he would have been right up next to the engineer, and then something would have happened. But here, he wasn't even like 2 cars down when he got shot. He barely got an attempt.
Yeah, it's weird because obviously there's some things in the movie that are a little ridiculous or over the top because it's a movie. But at the same time, that exact point makes it feel more realistic, just because it is a bit more punishing and it's a bit more relentless. I think that's the thing is, when we get to this last part in the train where, like, yeah, the brakes are, it's separated and the conductor slams on the brakes for the cars that are still moving behind, so they're sort of stopping at the edge of the bridge, but the front, however many cars, go onto the bridge, and the doctor actually says at one point before this, because they're what part of the train that they're separating from that will still be in the front half has some of the children in it. And one of the little girl that was talking to OJ throughout a lot of the movie, early on, he keeps calling them sweets. She ends up back in the back half of the train because she ends up walking out, and he has to he ends up getting shot at defending her and sort of shielding her. So he gets his big sort of heroic send off moment. But there's a line from the doctor here when this is brought up from his ex-wife that's unfortunate, but we have to hope that because we're separating the train, there's less train going over the bridge, so therefore it's got a better chance of making it. Yeah. Which logically, okay, that does make some sense. That's not a silly thing. But holy shit, as soon as they hit this bridge, and we see it creaking in, it's all rickety and whatever, it just collapses. And we get obviously the shots of the model train coming down and stuff. But what I was not prepared for was all of the really visceral interior shots of people falling down as the train obviously is at an angle, beams get into people as they're sitting down in the train, people screaming, just bloody
faces, just it's so rapidly cut as well, whereas all the lead up to this particular scene has been not rapid cuts, but a little bit longer, just a good second or two holding on each shot at the very least. This one, it's every half second you're seeing a new gored face flashing up in front of you.
Because I would describe the movie, as much as you're right in saying it's a little bit more intense and quick cut, immediately preceding this, because obviously it's ramping up. I would say the movie is mostly a slower burn, where it's the slow tension of the virus spreading, and then the discovery of it, and the slow realization of where they're going, and so on and so on. I think I'm quite comfortable in saying that this, sequence of this train getting down with this bridge and everyone inside dying is probably the most affecting scene I've ever seen in a disaster movie of the destruction itself. And I think part of it's because it is at the end, because I think most disaster movies, it's the end of Act 1, they'll have their initial big earthquake or volcano erupting or whatever it may be, the ship getting, capsized. And you'll see some death and stuff, but that's just a setup for the group of characters who survive, who then have to try and survive the rest of it. Here, we've spent all this time building up. They've caught this deadly virus. They've caught, COVID-18. And they've found out...
COVID-76.
Yeah, and they've found out late on in the film, you know what? It turns out it's actually quite easy to cure, and we're all okay. It's not actually deadly. Only to find out we're heading towards certain death anyway. So... something about this ending and seeing all these people die horrifically on the train actually was quite shocking and affecting, and I was like, I'm impressed. I'm impressed you're evoking some emotion out of me on this, because disaster movies, for as much as I enjoy a lot of them, I don't tend to feel stuff for when people are dying in them. It's just kind of a bit of fun, it's a bit of whatever.
The only one that I would compare it to, and it is very different in its execution, is Deep Impact. Where, meteor comes in, meteor hits, but unlike, say, Armageddon, where, there's this hope of humanity and, they might be able to save the day. Half of Deep Impact revolves around the fact of, we don't have an exit strategy. A lot of people are going to die. And in the end of the movie, a lot of people die. And this, I feel, is close to the same way, where... they hope that if they do something soon enough, they can actually survive everyone. The whole train could survive. That's when when Martin Sheen's making his way up to the front of the train to convince the guy to stop, or when they're trying to take control of the train in general. That's all in the mindset of, we can save this whole train. But there comes that turning point, right when Martin Sheen falls off, of, we can only save half this train. Maybe, just maybe, the other half will survive just on luck alone, but right now we're struggling to even save half of it. And that's that same sort of, once the train falls off, once it tumbles down, it gave me that same sort of feeling of Deep Impact, where these people were doomed. There was never a chance. As soon as Martin Sheen fell off, there was never going to be a chance that they survived, because this bridge was always going to collapse, whether they knew it or not.
Might I even, I said it's about half just based on how many train cars we see fall down. Can I speculate that it was actually 60% of the train, and that way it's the exact same kill rate as the virus, which just makes it dramatically ironic?
You can speculate all you want, and I'll go ahead and back you up on it.
It's just too poetic.
Yeah, exactly. It was 10 cars, and 6 of them fell off.
Yeah, it's just too poetic to not, discuss that possibility. Yeah, because obviously, we kind of jumped ahead because like so much of the interesting stuff is in this ending, and like this pivot point halfway through at Stockholm, where all these armed guards with hazmat suits come on the train, and they let the Doctor kind of be in control of like running things medically, but obviously once he eventually starts to oppose them, that's when they become this villainous sort of like force. And it's kind of interesting how it gets there, because it kind of starts off with, like you said, Martin Sheen. It turns out he's not actually infected with the virus. We think he is because he's got some of the symptoms, but the Doctor's kind of already like sussed it that it's actually withdrawal symptoms. He's just desperate for another hit. And even though he like takes his sugar mama by gunpoint up to the front of the train, uses her hostage, she's very calm about the whole thing, it has to be said. But he points the gun at the guards, he picks up one of their machine guns, he demands that they, he's going to shoot them all if they don't stop the train right now. And what's so funny is that at this point, we the audience don't know that this is actually the right thing to do, because this is before we've quite got to the point where, this train not stopping is actually certain death because this bridge is that dangerous.
Right.
So they kind of talk him down, and they kind of let him off easy with it, because it's like, well, where's he going to go? There's not really any point.
He's stuck on the train.
So he ends up like, so it's actually kind of touching that him, because he was kind of this like villainous guy for a minute, because out of fear, and it actually, of all things, it reminded me a little bit of Speed. So in Speed, when Jack jumps on the bus, and there's this one guy who thinks that this cop's on the bus because he's like wanted for like robbery or something. It's just some petty crime, and he pulls out a gun, and he has this big standoff one. That's kind of what this reminded me of, because it's like he's like thinking not so much that all the hazmat suits are for him, but like I have to get off the train and I have to do all this, and they're not letting me do it because I'm this heroin smuggler. That's exactly. So I got like a little bit of a Speed flashback.
I mean, I got a Speed flashback just because, at least in the first half of the movie, or no, I guess the second half more specifically, it does follow like that same sort of beat of, you are in a vehicle that is going to explode, and you have to find a way to save lives, however that may be. They want to try to just stop the train, but the whole second half of it is pretty Speed in general.
Yeah. So it's obviously the tone's very different, because they're going at a very different angle. But absolutely.
One thing you didn't mention though, and we said we bring it up, is that during that standoff between Martin Sheen and the rest of them is when the radio gets destroyed.
Yeah.
And so there is no communication between the general. But it's weird in that they set that up in order to justify, like, hey, situation has changed, we need to stop the train, and whatever soldier on board is currently the one in charge, because communication lines have been disrupted. But even if the communication lines weren't disrupted, the general was made clear he'd still be making the same decision. Like, he'd still be keeping the train going. So it didn't really matter that the communication lines were disrupted at all. It just kind of gave a little bit more, I guess, reason for them to try to take over.
Maybe it's just that idea that, like, maybe if the Doctor on the train confirmed to him, no, people are getting better, like literally everyone is getting better, and this is over, and there's nothing to be scared of, like, maybe that would have changed things. Maybe it wouldn't have, probably wouldn't have, given the way that he reacts.
Because the Doctor, who is literally next to the general, points out, like, hey, the dog is cured, like, it's fixed, and he's just like, yeah, for how long? Like, he doesn't believe her, basically. Says that's a dog either way. Like, perhaps this disease is still being carried in some way. Perhaps there's one person on board who still is just a carrier. They don't explicitly say that there is, but he is making up all these excuses basically just to cover his own mistake up, to cover up the US's mistake up, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we jumped right into that back half to talk about all this juicier stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of character introduction things that, there's a lot of stuff with the Doctor and his ex-wife and them sort of rekindling a little bit.
I mean, they are the main characters. If anyone has to be the main character, they're the main characters.
Absolutely. And it makes sense that you've got a Doctor on board who just naturally becomes this authority figure because he can help solve the problem that's going on. There's definitely a couple things early on where he first hears that there's a virus of some kind. He's told about it, and he goes to check, and he saw the guy that was infected earlier on, so he knows who to look for. When he first goes up to speak to him after that, and they're checking his body and stuff, that part of me did think, you're getting enough close there. I thought you might cover your face or something, but whatever.
I feel like that's just one of those things that we became aware of in 2020. That we're like, maybe don't like this. It's not just coughing. You don't have to worry about him coughing. It's the breathing part too. And they do specifically say it is an airborne, like it is through lungs and coughing and stuff like that. It isn't just through wounds or whatever like that.
Yeah.
So,
and I suppose some of the other characters do represent different things that are kind of relevant later, where he is this criminal who's naturally working against the man just in general because he's a criminal. And then you've got O.J. Simpson, who is Interpol, so he is technically part of the system, and he's hunting. So the idea that those two are working together by the end of the film to try and save the train is showing just what thinking outside of their role is. And
I think that it's trying to get forward a thing of the individual versus the faceless, conglomerate sort of thing, where especially with that ending reveal of the phone, the government as a whole is just this faceless, blameless organization where you can't particularly point to anybody who made the decision to do this horrible thing. It just kind of is the marching order of the whole place. Meanwhile, the individuals are able to specifically make these decisions to do the right thing. And it's only once you get into this, once you are unable to be blamed for something individually, that's where a lot of morality goes out the window. I think is where it's pointing to, or at least I feel is pointing to. Yeah,
and you've got the wife of an arms dealer who thinks she's in control the whole movie, and then finds out the guy she's been with has been using her to to get away with all this smuggling underneath her nose. So again, there's this kind of humbling element to it of you thought you had this or you had this much power, and turns out it means shit. Turns out you were being taken advantage of by someone else. So I think there's snippets of that throughout all the characters and kind of how they ultimately fit into the themes by the end. Like you said, all their plots feel very separate in the first half. They absolutely do, but they all fit into the theme by the end.
I think the only character that really doesn't get as much as I think they were kind of pushing for is the train conductor, because it showed that he's good friends with Kaplan, but in the end he's kind of just the map to the train. He's like, oh, come, let's go down to the storage quarters. They're right down here. I'm the one who has the key. So he's the only one who gets a little bit shafted, but everyone else is pretty much, I wouldn't say equal players, because obviously the Doctor and the writer are the primary ones, but it's more equal than I would even say Poseidon Adventure was, in that some characters, like Gene Hackman's character, was so far and above the main character of that movie, whereas this one, it's closer. It's not as disparate between roles.
Because I think with the main couple in this, with the Doctor and the ex-wife, who's the writer, you keep calling the writer, I keep calling the ex-wife, just in case that's confusing for anyone.
Yeah.
But they share a lot of moments before anyone else knows what's going on, where she's there to represent the concern of someone who doesn't, he obviously understands this threat and is terrified by it, but she's sort of reacting to him reacting to it, and is becoming the normal person who's terrified by it before the rest of the train gets to find out. So there's a purpose in her character in that sense as well. Which is actually one little detail that I wanted to bring up, just to go back to what we were saying about the bridge and talking about the individuals versus the establishment and all that. Is one detail they could bring up multiple times is that there was people who lived under the bridge a long time ago, and they decided to move because they actually thought the bridge was unsafe. Again, it's this idea that the individual people or the lower class or however you want to phrase it, collectively said, this is unsafe, we are moving, and evacuated where the bridge is, and it's lay there dormant for decades as a result with no one next to it. So again, these decisions were made by people, and
just one thing I want to bring up in terms of theming, or I guess more characterization, is that I feel that the ex-wife / writer and the doctor, they keep on pushing that the ex-wife is really good about her hunches. She's really good, like whenever she has a hunch about something, she always follows it and always goes through with it. I feel that the pair of them are meant to represent like the average person's like intuition and then ability to reason through it. The ex-wife represents the intuition, and the doctor, obviously being more left-minded, he is the one who can reason through and be like, okay, this, that, and the other thing. Which is something that, the government as a whole, it's just executing orders. It's just, here's policy. We aren't going to question it. We aren't going to feel like if something's wrong, we're going to change it. We're just going to do as policy says. And I wonder if that is a intentional characterization beat for that.
Yeah, maybe. Do you think there's like a... I'm just wondering if there's something to the idea that O.J. Simpson's pretending to be a priest, and then ultimately when he reveals what he really is, it happens in an exchange where he comes in and Martin Sheen's like sick from withdrawal, and the sugar mama's like sort of sitting next to him, and O.J. Simpson comes in and she says something like, "Oh, Father, like awfully kind of you to like come and offer like a prayer or whatever, but it wouldn't help. He's an atheist." And OJ pulls out a gun and says, "So am I." And I can't help but wonder if again this idea of the church as well as kind of an establishment, organized religion is this like body, it's this entity, and it turns out that the character we thought represented that is actually not that, and just at one point literally just pulls the collar out and isn't that anymore.
I mean, I think that it's a strange characterization, because obviously Martin Sheen's character, for that scene at least, is meant to be more of a villain. Mm-hmm. He's meant to be more of an antagonist towards the average person. But yeah, no, the fact that he is a priest and then, he takes it off and represents still the man, but that only falls apart in the sense that I don't feel like if at any point in this movie O.J. Simpson's character was represented to be the villain, Pretty much he was always on the protagonist side the whole way through. And the only time it would have flipped would have been that scene where he was pulling out a gun on Martin Sheen, but Martin Sheen immediately flipped that around to be the villain. So at no point was O.J. Simpson an antagonist, I think.
No, not at all.
In this movie. I really want to clarify that. O.J. Simpson was not an antagonist in this movie.
In real life, maybe a little...
just a tiny bit.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I just thought I was wondering about the thematics of that, and just as if it's also sort of, because I wouldn't say there's not a lot of characters in this who start praying to God for help or anything like that. No. It's all about characters being proactive and actually solving the problem and doing something about it, which I guess fits into the theme of Gene Hackman's character from
exactly
from Poseidon Adventure.
Yeah, it's they. At no point in this movie did any character say, well, let's just go over the bridge and see if it works. Like, no, at the whole way through, they're fighting this. They're not saying, let fate decide. It's all about, no, we have to do something here. And I feel like that's kind of a running theme throughout all disaster movies, thinking about it. There's very few, because it's just not narratively interesting. There at no point is there any interest of saying, like, no, let's be passive protagonists. It's like, no, we want to see them do something. So
there is quite often, though, the character who represents that side, though, who wants to be passive.
Mm-hmm.
Poseidon Adventure definitely had that.
Yeah, that was Ernest Borgnine's whole character.
Yeah. And this I don't think necessarily does. The only character who is saying, "Oh, they should just go over the bridge, it'll be fine," is the one who kind of accepted that it isn't, is just lying about it. So it's not the same thing.
I think that the issue in this movie is that there is no passive choice. Like, no matter what, both sides are actively making a decision to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Because the passive choice would be let them just hang around town and intermingle. Like, don't send them to a location, don't do anything, just let them be. And that passive choice would make for less of a train disaster movie and more of a virus disaster movie. That'd be the part where it gets into Stockholm and everyone freaks out.
I think what's interesting about actually the setup is that obviously no one would ever argue that what these peace protesters are doing is right. They're setting off a bomb in a building that has people in it is never in any way, shape, or form okay.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think is interesting about it is the idea that, yeah, what they're doing is wrong, but it's not their fault that this virus thing really happens, because the Americans are already like breaking rules by having it there in the first place. So this virus spreading, as much as obviously they directly cause it by like interfering and getting involved, it shouldn't have been there. So it's just exposing the fault that was already there from the establishment. So it's kind of an interesting again thing just to think about thematically leading into what the rest of the movie starts saying about it's the establishment, it's the man, it's the organization that is at fault, that is doing all these things without caring about the people underneath. And again, the idea that underneath the bridge there's people who chose to move away. They weren't told to move away by Poland's government necessarily. They just moved away because they knew it was unsafe. Yeah,
exactly.
So
feel like we're kind of wrapping up, but one thing I did want to bring up is the scene before Martin Sheen starts trying to go down the side of the train. He tries to instead go up the top of the train. And twofold of this scene. First off, I think, can you agree with me in that those are the worst special effects of the whole movie?
Oh yeah, like the rear screen projection or whatever it was when he stuck his head out the top of the train did look pretty. And this is the sort of thing that I know can be done in a pre-CG era, because I've seen other train movies where you see characters walking up and down the top of a train and it looks fine. So yeah, this look rough, but it's just it's one shot effectively of him sticking his head out.
Yeah, which then leads me into my second point of he looks up at the top of the train. We see footage of the top of the train, and then he jumps back down and says, "I can't do it." Quote, "They're all over up there." Did I miss something? It's the way he was describing it. It made it sound like the guards were literally like on top of the train, but I didn't see anything. So did I miss something there?
No, I noticed this too. It's either he's lying because he's scared, but then he's willing to climb out the outside, so that doesn't really make much sense. Because if anything, this feels more dangerous climbing on the outside. It feels more stealthy going up top. Maybe he means that the cables and stuff are too low down, and that seems dangerous.
I was thinking that because they keep showing the cables, but at the same time, it didn't seem. Maybe it was just a issue of how they shot it, but it didn't seem too low that he couldn't have just like crawled his way up.
Yeah, I wonder if there is maybe like not so much that they're on top of the train necessarily, but the idea that maybe if I looked at the scene again, maybe there you can see a guard like where the trains meet, the two cars meet, I should say. Maybe you can see like one sort of clearly been able to see up to where he's coming. I don't know. Like I don't know. But I kind of initially I took it as he's making this excuse up because he's too scared to do it.
Right.
But then he immediately offers to do the equally crazy thing of climbing alongside the outside of the train. Which, I mean, apparently he climbed a mountain. I don't know if we ever necessarily found out if that was true or not, but apparently that's what he was doing before you met.
It was being recounted by the Sugar Mama, so I have to assume that it's kind of true.
Yeah, we have to assume. I mean, he seems confident climbing, at least, and that's why he's doing it this way. But yeah. So, honestly, the tragedy of the back chunk of this movie is very impressively done, and actually hits kind of hard. The last 15-20 minutes are especially quite good, and I think there's good pockets of a lot of good stuff there. I think the start's really strong with the setup. The introduction of the passengers is fairly strong. It slows down a bit as we're sort of bouncing around all of them, whilst we're still like getting to the point where anyone knows there's a virus on the train.
Right.
But once you get to Stockholm, I would say, whenever like everything really starts ramping up, I think the back half of the movie is all pretty much like just constantly doing things. It's constantly shaking things up, and you realize that it's becoming less about surviving a virus and the irony being that the virus ultimately wasn't that much of a threat, and it's the people who are a threat, which is, again, a very disaster movie, and lots of movies really, but, man is the real monster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if instead of them putting them comatose, this thing switched over to, oh, they're making them into zombies, it would literally just be the same thing of, yeah, I'm sure the zombies would have been an issue for like maybe 10 minutes of the movie, but then it would have flipped over to how is the hierarchies of this train going to shake out as they try to hide from the zombies.
Absolutely. That's just, I think this is absolutely still a disaster movie, but it is a very different disaster movie to, Poseidon Adventure, Tower Inferno, and stuff like that. And I think that's one of the exciting things about doing this season is, because, when I was doing research for, what's considered a 70s disaster movie, this was showing up quite heavily on like every list. So there was no doubts going into it that it fit, but it definitely does feel different and it plays different. And I'm kind of pleased that it's so different from Poseidon Adventure because it felt quite refreshing by the end, bizarrely.
I'm wondering if this would have been better for us in like week 3 or 4 of this month, where we've already been through a bunch of things that feel the same, and then we all of a sudden get this refresher.
Yeah. But yeah, this is 2 of 5 for the season. So we'll see. I think next week we're on to the big bus. So,
oh boy.
So another vehicle, but this is an atomic powered bus, I believe. So,
but by the end of the movie, it's going to be a virus. That's where they get you.
I mean, this next one claims to be part comedy. Like that's actually in the genre list.
Okay.
So I'd expect something a lot more lighthearted with the next one. But I mean, I'm just going based on like the genres in IMDb.
Gotcha.
So who knows? They're not that trustworthy.
Yeah.
But
I will trust their trivia until the day I die, though.
Yeah, honestly, I went into this not knowing what to expect and got into it quite quickly and found myself very surprised by the end. I quite like this.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I think I fell out of it a bit more in the middle than you did. I was just getting a bit sort of blasé with the whole thing. But yeah, once it hit the Stockholm section, and even then the Stockholm section felt like it dragged for a little bit. Especially there was they make the call over a bullhorn or something like that of, we are going to be making this announcement once and only once in your language, but we will be saying it in 5 different languages. And I was like, as soon as the announcement kept going for like 4 minutes, I was like, please don't repeat this announcement again. I can't take 20 minutes of this in German.
I think that's just a very 70s thing, is to really sort of let those things play out. Because I remember, we've done 70 seasons on Ace, me and Tara, and there's definitely some movies in that where there's a movie called The Terminal Man where there's like a scientific procedure at one point. And this procedure, it gets like a full 10-minute scene of like painstaking detail of every part of it. And it does feel like this is a very 70s thing to just like do the whole thing. Just, let's not edit any of it out and just go for every bit. But I think spending all the time with the characters did make the ending stuff hit a bit harder when a few of them die really quickly.
Oh, yeah. I think the only thing that fell apart for me character-wise at the ending is, strangely enough, the nanny and the little girl, who we have not mentioned that much up until now, but because they didn't have much of a role, and yet somehow this little girl crying for her nanny immediately caused O.J. Simpson's character to die. And then at the very, very end of the movie, the doctor and the ex-wife, they start making out, and this little girl who was saved is just staring at them. And they have this moment that seems to be like, oh, this little girl, she lost her nanny. We will take her in. We will protect her. But they explicitly say that it's the nanny. Like, she has a mom and dad. This moment felt just a little bit weird to me, that it's like, in any other disaster film, it's the moment where they like agree to adopt this kid, more or less, because she's all alone in the world.
Well, that's why it's not a big deal, is because it's like, oh, we're just going to look after her to get her back to her parents, and that's it.
I guess. It's because of the way I've seen other films, though. Like, so many times the kid is now parentless, and this moment where they like bring the kid in and they're hugging the kid and whatnot, is the moment where they're like, "You're gonna live with us now," and it's like, she's got parents, guys.
Yeah,
you need to bring them back to her parents.
the OJ thing made a little bit of sense to me, just in a structure perspective, because almost every scene she had was with him. It was her being inquisitive with him and poking holes in his like story and him getting annoyed at it. Things like that, asking why he's got a different initial on his handkerchief. Because this is why I was thinking he was a bad guy, is because, he's killed someone and taken their outfit. That's what I was thinking.
He killed a priest. But yeah, no, the only reason I don't think that it doesn't work structurally, it just, by far, out of any character that can be considered even named characters, I think, those two are by far the least developed.
Sure.
And yet they still have this poignant part at the end of like, no, the girl's going to be with them. It's like, okay, well, sure, I guess.
Yeah. I was going to say the young couple as well, but I suppose they don't have like a big poignant moment. They just kind of like the guy gets shot. I think the woman survives, but the guy gets shot just kind of suddenly at one point.
Yeah.
It's a good moment though, because it's like him and then someone else immediately gets killed. Like,
it's the nanny.
It's the nanny, because they're just in this line. They're just in this straight line, getting mowed down. It's just horrific. So, yeah. And I think in many ways that's what the sugar mom is there to represent, is someone who is just so ignorant to everything going on that she's just always, like, even when like she's held at gunpoint, she's still just treating things like everything's a game, and she's above it all because she's rich, and she's, like, my husband's so powerful, this doesn't matter to me, like, and I it's almost realistic that she doesn't ever like sort of learn and like get scared into reality. She's still just as obtuse about it by the end, because if 2020 and that's taught me anything, it's that some people, despite all evidence to the contrary, will still just believe whatever they want to believe to the bitter end. It's quite something. But I came out of it really feeling like I watched a really interesting movie that I hadn't heard of, that is a disaster movie, but also goes for, it's sort of punching a little bit higher as far as what it's trying to say and feel.
Yeah, it's not a disaster movie just for shock and awe. It does definitely have some societal, something to say about society as a whole, something to say about how people interact with power structures and stuff like that. It isn't just hey, we got $10 million to crash a model train set, and we're going to make it the biggest moment you've seen this year.
It's actually really good. Like, it's a really impressive. Like, this train crashing sequence at the end is very surprisingly gnarly.
I think what sells it even more for me is the fact that they crash the train, they cut back to some other place, probably the military office, and then they cut back and just show the dead bodies floating in the water. Like, it sells it more of like, yeah, we had that big moment of, oh my, everything explodes and whatnot. But then these people are still dead, and the movie sells that to you of, this wasn't just shock and awe and then you can forget about it. This is a lasting impact.
Yeah,
sort of scene. It
feels like a big deal having it at the end, and having it be this kind of like bittersweet success that they kind of succeeded in saving some of the train, but all these people up front all died, and so it leaves you kind of a very somber end. And I cannot emphasize enough the build to this bridge and the horror movie music every time we cut to the bridge to like, just like, we're getting there, we're getting to the Cassandra Crossing. Because the first time it came up, which is when the military guy, the colonels said, we're going to send them up through here and they're going to eventually land here. The locals call it the Cassandra Crossing. And the camera does this thing where it kind of like goes up and like focuses on this point in the map, and the music has this little sting as you see the name of the place, which happens to be the movie's title, on the map. And I thought, that's it. Like, they've done like a little cheesy moment there to like, that's the name of the movie. Like, this is where it's all building up to. But I was not expecting it to be this prominent thing for this, Holocaust survivor to keep bringing up that it's near this concentration camp. If it's not specifically the one that he was at, certainly he knew of it, and he was in the camp in the same country. And then as it went on, it was like, no, the bridge at Cassandra Crossing is like a death trap, and we're all going to die there. So it all became about that. So I guess I wasn't expecting the name to be as important to the movie as it ended up being, but it actually is.
I mean, when it's first pitched to us, it's literally just, here's the route we're taking. It's like naming a movie Route 66 or something like that. It's like, no, it's just the road. Like, the end result is where we're going to. But then, as you get more into the movie, I guess from a meta standpoint, you should have realized it was going to be more important because it is the name of the movie. But it does do a good job of slowly revealing over the course of it, like, no, it's yes, the end result, like whether it's the camp or whether it's this concentration camp, it is this bridge is going to be the focal point of the story.
You say that, but I've definitely seen movies where, like, the name of the movie is like something in the movie, and it's not as anywhere. It's.
Oh yeah,
you know,
no, of course not.
It's not a big deal necessarily. It's just what they've chosen to name the movie after.
Yeah,
but yeah, great. Final 10 minutes, like seriously,
yeah,
very surprisingly excellent. I was not expecting it. So I guess we'll rate the film then out of 10. David, what you thinking?
This is a tough one, honestly. Because it does feel like a movie of two halves for me, and the second half is very, very well done. The first half, though, it does strain just a little bit from it. I think I'm going to go ahead and say I think it's a 7 for me. I think I'm giving this one a 7, just ever so slightly lower than Poseidon Adventure last week, and that's just because while the end bombastic, while I feel it did have something to say, while I do think it was good, there were just those moments in the beginning where it wasn't keeping me engaged. And if it wasn't for the sake of this show, I think once we hit like maybe the 45-minute mark, I was going to think it was like too slow. It was not getting anywhere, because for a 2-hour movie where I was informed in the beginning that there was going to be this virus outbreak, obviously that doesn't happen. There is no real virus outbreak in this movie. It is so a minuscule part of the larger story being told. But the movie takes just a tiny bit too long to get there for it. Having said that, being forced to sit through the movie for this show, I'm glad I did. I'm glad that I did sit through and get to the second half. But I do think it does dock just a little bit of the fact of I even was bored at any point in this, that I was debating whether or not it was even worth getting to that point. So 7 for me.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by this, and I wasn't really sure what to expect going in. I think the build up and the teasing of like how the virus is going to spread, and watching this like guy who's boarded the train, who ultimately dies quite early on, but him moving around and him like, patting a baby in the head, or brushing past someone else, and it's like, okay, here's all the places. All that I think is quite interesting to watch as it's introducing all the other characters. There's just a little bit of a lull, and then once it sort of takes a turn and then slowly kind of reveals what it's really doing for its end game, I think is really fascinating, and the change of tone and realizing, oh, that's what this movie really is quite exciting to me. And then the last like 10-15 minutes with the train wreck and the poignant kind of downbeat ending were a genuine surprise, because it kind of feels like with this, it's a disaster movie, but it's not necessarily sticking rigidly to the disaster movie formula, and as a result, it feels quite fresh to me because of that. The pacing to me, I think, is just very 70s, and I think there's a lot of movies from the 70s that have this kind of pacing. So
that's fair.
And maybe I'm just a bit more attuned to it because I've seen a bunch of movies.
I am very naive to the 70s. I mean, I've seen the biggest hits, but I have not gone deeper down the rabbit hole.
So all of that is to basically say, I think I'm actually going to go a little higher than Poseidon Adventure and give it an 8.
Okay.
So I think I'm feeling a bit more positive about it. So yeah, it's definitely uneven. I would agree it's a little uneven, but it's a very like good and interesting uneven film. And I think I'll take this over your clean cut like cookie cutter action movie any day. Easy peasy. So
your Roland Emmerichs.
Yeah, your Roland Emmerich. I mean, jeez, still getting nightmares from Moonfall. The moon fell. That was the plot. The moon was falling.
You get what's on the box. I don't see what the issue here is.
So as for our agreed ranking, our determination, does it make the cut? I think it's pretty clear for me that it does make the cut.
Same. I
Yeah.
have no qualms with that.
Okay, it makes the cut. There you go. That is the Cassandra Crossing, our second of 5 disaster movies, 70s disaster movies specifically, for this season. Next week we are doing The Big Bus, which is another one that I'd never heard of until I went researching. So here's hoping for something entertaining.
I guarantee you, there's a bus.
And it's big.
And based off these other movies, it'll probably be a virus or something at some point, because gotta have your pivot.
Poseidon Adventure didn't pivot.
It didn't pivot that hard. There was a little bit in there, but for the most part, it stayed pretty stock forward.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know what to expect from it, but we'll find out. So thank you very much for joining us. Of course, you can tell us what you think of the Cassandra Crossing if you've seen it down in the comments below. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All those things help us out. As does, of course, go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting us for as little as $1 per month. You get bonuses and all sorts for supporting us over there, both for this show, like the bonus episode every month. Obviously, we did Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, which will already be up and available to patrons, the sequel to the Poseidon Adventure. So you can go check out that. And of course, hit the super thanks button on YouTube as well if you want to do a one-time thing. But any and all support does help us out. And of course, you get bonuses for other shows here from Mail Fuzz Movies and Mail Fuzz TV. But that is us. That is the show. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies and nothing stops this train.